Hey, before we get going, I just want to let you know that longtime friend of the channel and day one patron, or patron, uh, Norm from Norm Time Shipping has a little video channel, and he does some great stuff over in England. If you're into tugboats, ships, anything nautical, he has some great videos on his channel, and I told him that I would let you guys know about it. So there'll be go to Norm Time Ship. I try to put it on the screen here, but I'll also in the description I'll put a link that you can click on. All right, so go check out Norm at Norm Time Ship. Norm Time Ship, because it's the Time River, I guess, something like that. All right, see ya. Now on with the show. Hello and welcome, I'm Tim and this is TimBatSea. And today we are in beautiful Key West, Florida. Well, actually we're out at the sea buoy coming in. The crew opposite us, the other crew, they had picked up a load of jet fuel up in Norfolk and we're bringing it down the coast, and we crew changed off of what we call Port Everglades, what you would know as Fort Lauderdale, where a launch boat took us out. And we did a crew change on the fly. So we got on, they got off, and away we went. But anyway, a little while, a day or two later, we're down here in Florida, and we have been doing circles to wait for the proper time for the pilot to come out and get us. Here's the Key West pilot boat, and the pilot coming around. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is I wanted to show you how it looks on camera like it's flat calm, but remember, we're well over 100 feet and well over many hundred tons of vessel, so we don't really move that much. But you can see this is a big pilot boat that's made for being offshore, and you can see it's still getting beaten up and banged around. This pilot boat usually takes the pilots to the cruise ships and back, or helps the cruise ships come in. But anyway, after rounding up, towing in, shortening up, and rounding up in the harbor, we got the barge alongside, and right now we are going to go and break the wire, and a lot of people want to see how that's done. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to show the rounding up process, which I was quite proud of. I was hoping that that was going to go, because generally I like to round up on the port side, because the doghouse, the steering station in the stern of the tug, is on the port side, so I have a really good view. And so when I round up on the starboard side, it's not as easy, or it's not hard. It's just I don't have the same view that I would have if I rounded up on the port side. And incidentally, that's to bring you in on some local gossip. There's always a debate on whether the aesthetics of a tug looking symmetrical by having the doghouse or the winch controls and steering station in the center of the stern, or the center line of the tug, is that looks very pleasing to the eye, and there are a lot of boats that are built that way. And then there's other ones with an offset one, usually to the port side. And my feeling for this is I would rather be on a tug that had one really good view of things ahead, where I can just stick my head out and look down the side of the house and see what's ahead of the tug, because normally when I'm in the doghouse I'm looking backwards, and a not so good view on the other side. But when you put the doghouse in the middle, you have two sides that are bad and no good side. So anyway, in this particular case, the other crew or the tankermen, for one reason or another, we didn't hang a strap on the barge. And remember, down here, we don't bring the tankermen don't ride the barge. and so they're on. So the barge is unmanned. Now what we're doing here is letting go of the wire, and you can see they put this. Some people call that little line a lizard line. In my vernacular, I call it the let go line. And when we get everything going, we go and we drop that. That's the actual pennant that goes to the fish plate, that separates to the bridle and goes to the barge. So that's holding up a couple tons of weight there. And if you say, well, what do you do now? How do you get it back? They have a retrieval system where there's a line on the front of the barge that will pull that up, and they get it back on deck. So when we go to put it back on, and now the chief and the AB are out there working. They're going to get the push gear ready because we've been towing, and now right now we have a line on the bow that's holding us close to the barge, so that if we had to move the barge, we could. But we've done this in a place where we've got it slowed down, stopped, and plenty of room all around us. And so we're just kind of at the will of the mercy of the elements at this point. But like I say, we don't just do this randomly. And if we were in a tight channel, or if there's traffic coming, or there was a hazard somewhere, we just wouldn't let go, and we'd be able to maneuver the barge while we're made up on the headline, and the wire would act as our stern line. But right now, Chip is up in the wheelhouse, and he's backing out to get away from the barge, and then he'll start driving over to get in the notch of the barge. And I'm over here watching the guys on deck, making sure that everything's cool. And in a little bit, we'll show you what happens out in the bow. So we'll go over there right about now. Okay, so the camera is now pointing at the bow of the tug. And this right here we call the H-bit up here, and we go through, they put the line through what we call the bull nose. And that's something that we use when the barge is loaded or down, or it's a barge that it's relatively straight. When the barge goes light, you'll see we won't use the bull nose. And the reason why is that because the barge might be 22 feet up, it would make a hard 90-degree turn there. And that makes it, more susceptible to chafe. Meaning that if it came through the bull nose and then went straight up to 22 feet, where if it came from the H-bit and went up to the bull nose, it still would go up 22 feet, but it wouldn't be at that hard 90. It'd be more like about a 60-degree angle, or maybe 70. I don't have my protractor on me, but anyway, so that's usually the rule of thumb. That and remember that this headline that they're using, for those that aren't familiar with this, it does two things. The first thing it does is it holds us in the notch while we're getting the push gear up, which will go on either side, which will affix us in here. But it also holds us so that when we go to back or we turn, or if anything, if one of the legs of the push gear breaks, if we didn't have something to hold the bow into the notch, the tug would come out and the other push gear would come tight and pull on the stern of the vessel and of the tug and roll it over sideways, causing what we call a tripping. And that doesn't happen like over time. That happens like almost instantaneously. So the headgear, the headline that we put up here, I've seen some people that put just a little what we call a handy line, or something that we put a docking line up there with. Because, I'm not, look, I critique my actions on the tug that I work on with my crew. If somebody else does it another way, that's their business. I'm not trying to talk ill of them. But I have been on boats where we've broken the push gear before, and if we had a small line, like a tie-up line, that would just snap instantly, and we'd roll over and probably all die, and I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. So, not only right now, at this point, that's not an issue because we're not really making way. And when Chip is holding us in here, the tankerman still has the bridle hanging down. It takes him about 10-15 minutes to pull that thing up on deck. So because we're in the middle, we don't really want to work on the barge. In other words, if the barge was at a dock, we'd have one in gear, and it would just be pulling against the lines at the dock, and it would hold us in there nice and tight. But because we're out in the water, we don't want to put any energy we put into the barge, we're going to have to take out of it eventually. So he's just holding it. So he gets us into the listen to me talk. He gets us into the notch gently, we put up this heavy-duty headline that will hold us there. Then he'll do a left twist to bring the port side over, and we put up, it's out of screen, out of the shot right now, but they'll put up the left leg, or the port leg of the push gear. Now he's doing a right twist to bring up the right leg of the push gear. All this time I'm back in the doghouse, and when he gives me the signal, I will tighten up the push gear and marry the two units together. So right now he's twisting over that way, and that also helps too, because if the push gear isn't pulled all the way out, it's very heavy, and so we use the weight of the barge and the tug to pull the push gear out, as opposed to trying to have somebody break their back trying to pull on that. So that's what we're doing. Okay, so now it looks, I'm guessing right now that we're probably all set, and he's got us there, and you'll see, hopefully I'll start tightening up back there, and we'll get married right in here. And if I do it nice and slowly, it won't be a big bang. So we're not really seeing, oh, it's still moving a little bit there. Yeah, I think that's probably it. So I'll use all the strength the winch has to tighten up that Amstel Blue push gear, which remember, those blue synthetic lines have the braking strength of almost twice the size if they were wire. So they're really, really super strong. And it's funny, Chip and I were talking about, or no, it was the pilot and I were talking. The pilot's like, oh, you get that synthetic line. And he remembered the old days as when I started out as a deckhand, we didn't have that. We had these big, all the push cables were wire, and you'd have what we call BB winches on the barge. And apparently they paid for all those $30,000 aside for the push gear, that with that synthetic line right there that you're seeing right there. They paid for that. They justified the cost by not having to pay people for back and hernia operations, because it was just so heavy. But now we're all set, we're all good. So while Chip is keeping an eye on things, we are made up in one unit. I am headed up to the upper house, and once I get all squared away, I will take control again from Chip down below, and the pilot will come up with me, and we will go head into our berth in Key West, Florida. Okay, in an effort to speed things along here, we've increased the speed by tenfold. So you can see we're still just kind of sitting here, and we're sitting here getting the systems up, getting everything ready. Oh, and I can't just get up in the wheelhouse and take off, because remember, the bridle are the two legs of huge heavy wire that goes from one side of the barge to a fish plate, and then from the fish plate to the other side of the barge. And the fish plate is this big triangle piece of steel that weighs probably a ton or more, and then in front of that it's got a big bridle that comes out to a socket. All of that is hanging down in the water because we let that go. So the tankerman down there, he has a line that is on a line that goes to a shackle that goes to the end of the pennant, so that when we're towing, the shackle slides all the way back, and we don't put any pressure on that line. But when we're not towing, when we need to lift it up, he pulls on that line, and it slides all the way up to the end of the pennant and pulls it right aboard, so it's all set to go. So that's what that's doing. And now we are good, we're up and going, and we're headed inbound. Now there's a couple things that make the Keys a little different. One is that we can't just go where we want to go, because it's all a wildlife sanctuary and national park all throughout the Keys, and because they're worried that if you're not the best mariner, or at least a tugboat guy, you might drag your cable along and interfere with some the reef down below, which would not only would be bad for the cable and all that, but it would also be bad for the reef. And then anytime you have what we call red flag or hazardous cargo, they want you to be careful with that too. So there's a dotted line on the chart that they have us stay out of, and that usually keeps us around about the 400 to 800 foot range. It drops off very deeply, very deep out there. And so we tow this in, and that's one of the things they do. The other thing is that when we come in here, we have to have 2 tugboats, and even though that we don't really need 2, in fact we don't really even need 1, although I was glad I had it this time because I had experienced some things that weren't supposed to happen. But anyway, they have 2 just so that if our primary tug dies, they still have a secondary tug there to help us. So you may have seen a little tug that was behind us, and they were the ultimate parachute in case something happened. But this other tug beside us came by, and he's a good one, and so I told him to just follow along beside us. Now if you've ever been into Key West, you see right on the right hand side here there's a big dock there, and if you come to a cruise ship, that's where most of the cruise ship, not all of them, but most of the cruise ships go there. A little bit further up you'll see Mallory Square, and if you've been to Key West, it's really fun. They have street performers there, and everyone goes there to watch for the infamous green flash, but they usually end up seeing other types of flashes down there. But now we're back to normal speed, and we are lining up on the dock. You can see we've got the assist tug made up alongside. Now, in talking with the pilot, remember the pilot brings us local information and local knowledge, and there's always a big debate. People say, well, if there's a crash, is it the pilot's fault? Well, you hire a pilot to give you local knowledge and to be compliant with the law, but it's ultimately the master's responsibility to whether the pilot is giving you bad information or good. But luckily we have really good pilots around here, and especially this one was great, and he advised me that there was a flood tide which would be going from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen, and that once the bow was in the dock it wouldn't experience any of that flood. And so in doing that, instead of putting the assist tug all the way up on the port bow like you would see me do in New York, I brought him back to midship, and that you'll see in a little while here was ultimately a really good plan on my part. And in hindsight, if I did it again, I'd probably even have him split the difference, be a quarter of the way up the barge, so he'd be a tug length closer to me. And the reason being is that once that bow gets inside that slip there, it's not going to be coming over, and I need him to push because most of the pressure from the flood tide is going to be on the tug, which will be sticking back, and I don't have any lateral control. Remember, I can go forward or back, but I can't really, it's not like I have a Z driver that I can move the thrust of the boat. So that's what I'm doing. So right here I'm lining up, I'm talking with my deckhand, and my deckhand will tell me the big thing when I come in like this. You've seen this in New York before. We ask, let me know when you can see down the face of the dock. So he is about 350 feet ahead of me, so basically a football field ahead of me, and as soon as he can see down the face of that dock, I know that I can start bringing the bow over. And when I say that, people forget. And it's funny because right now I've been spending a lot of time in Fort Lauderdale, and I see all these $1 million boats with people that just bought a boat and they don't seem to understand. Unlike cars, boats don't steer from the bow, they steer from the stern. Kind of more like a forklift. And if you haven't driven a forklift, what that means is when I say I'm bringing the bow over, unless I'm twin screwing, that bow is going to stay there. When I come full right rudder, the bow stays there and the stern starts to move out. Now eventually there's a pivot point and it does move it, but at these speeds that's really what's happening. So now we can look straight down the dock and see the face of that dock, and now I'm starting to see that I'm falling off all the time, which is a good thing because when I first came in there I was coming in too tight, and the pilot was advising me that the fenders that you see there, what we call the Yokohamas, those big black fenders the size of a Volkswagen Bug, he said that you don't really want to squeeze up against them because they're not held on as well as he'd like them to be. And so using that local knowledge, I made sure that I wouldn't touch them, so I'm coming over, and as you can see, I was expecting the stern to come flying off, and because of that, I've overcompensated. The bow is going to the left, and the stern, or right now the midship of the barge, is coming to the right, and that's something that I have to start working against. So I'm probably coming in, and I'm probably coming in a little bit faster than I normally would, but the reason why I'm doing that is I'm trying to, I know that once I get in, I'll be out of the tide, so that's why I come rolling right in here at this speed. And you might say, oh, that doesn't seem too fast. Yeah, remember that we have about over 2 million gallons of jet fuel, which weighs a considerable amount. So with all of our units together, we're talking over 10,000 tons worth of energy coming. So this is a very good, it's going to take me a while to get this slowed down. So now that I get it flat, and now I should not be falling into the dock as much. Moving it over 2 knots, there's no way that I'll be able to have that assist tug. It's a conventional tug. It's not a tractor tug, so it doesn't have the Z drive. So there's no way he could get out to a 90 and push me into the dock, because all the water that we're moving ahead with is pushing against him. That's going to make him flat against the barge. So I'm trying to do as much as I can without having to use him. But once we get up here, then we'll get it slowed down. We'll have him come ahead, and when he comes ahead, he'll say, "Yeah, next." It's happening right now. So you see how he's starting to roll out sideways. That's because you can see I've gotten the barge stopped. So now he can come out and push us over. Now, something that happens often when you go to a place that you haven't been to a million times. There's always a big debate on where the connection is. And in this particular one, we had an agent. The agent was phenomenal. She was amazing. She called us and she was on the radio to greet us and everything, and had an orange cone where we needed to be. And I'm not really sure what happened, but my deckhand was explaining that there was somebody on the dock that was being less helpful, and it certainly wasn't the agent, because she was amazing. But the tankerman and the guy on the dock were, I guess, frustrated with something or other. But like I say, the good news is that my deckhand, although being very young, knew that I asked him what was going on down there. And he said, "Oh, they're having a disagreement." And that's exactly what I want to hear. Well, I don't want to hear that they're having a disagreement, but I don't need to hear anything that I can't control. And what they're doing, I don't have a lot of control over. Okay, so right now you can see the stern is still falling off. So in order to do this, I don't want because after a while that bow is going to go by the last Yokohama, and it runs the danger of the bow going in metal to concrete. You know what I mean? It's not like the series of Yokohamas are all together. They're spread out like every 50 or 75 feet, 100 feet, something like that. So what I would do in this case, I'd probably keep having the tug maneuvering. You know, he's still pushing on us very lightly, and I'll put the rudder hard to port, and I'll give a right twist. So the right engine ahead, the port engine astern, and we twist over, and that will slowly lift the bow off and push the stern in. And if you're interested in your own boat, how things like this work, you should think that generally speaking, how the boat is loaded, how it's built, what keel it has, its draft, all these things are things that change things. But in a broad sense, a very loose explanation of this is that you can usually assume that the pivot point on a tug and barge, or in your case maybe your own private boat, and this is something I use for my sailboat as well, so you figure it's about a third of the way back from the bow. So if you split your boat into thirds, it should remember, this is very broad, but the pivot point in calm water, not affected by tides, it should pivot around a third of the bow. All right, so that's what that is. All right, so now we're flat, and I think that there was also some confusion about whether we went ahead 10 feet or back 15, and so we're doing all that here. But it's beautiful. The weather in the Florida Keys, this is just a good example of how nice it is. If you look over in the water on the left side of the screen, you'll see where ahead of the barge it's a nice turquoise, and closer towards the barge there you see it looks almost milkish. And although I'm not a geologist and I don't know this for fact, I suspect that this area has been dredged, and that it was probably the old limestone, which most of the Keys are. I've been to the Keys a million times recreationally, and even when it rains, the puddles are filled up with this milk because of the limestone that comes off of just the regular. They don't have a lot of soil. It's mostly old coral reef that's up there. So anyway, what that means is that the sand and the sediment that's on the bottom that isn't affected by the tide will over time will sit down. But then when you bring a tugboat in that has, you know, almost 8 or 10 foot wheels, and I start backing really hard, it'll blow all that stuff up, and you know, so that's what you're seeing with the water changing the colors there. And if you're worried about the environment, I'm quite certain that we can do nothing without having some effect, whether it be positive or negative. It's highly unlikely that there's no effect. But I can tell you that usually when you see a tugboat or even a regular fishing boat or a boat, any boat with big propellers that's moving, you know, that's putting out a lot of, well, they call it slippage, and that means that the propeller is moving water faster than the water around you. In other words, if a propeller was 100% efficient, each revolution would cause the boat to move ahead depending on the pitch without any water pushing out the back. That water that pushes out the back is what they call slippage. So any of these big boats that have big propellers with a lot of slippage, you'll usually see a whole bunch of birds flying behind, you know, marine birds like seagulls and stuff like that, gannets and all that. And they're following, and that's because it usually blows up a lot of stuff, nutrients and other animals, and come up, and it becomes a feeding frenzy behind you. So I'm not saying that's a great thing. I'm just saying that, apparently the people that know these things aren't too concerned about us moving water or putting clouds of the stone wash in the water. I guess it's something that happens naturally anyways. Don't be concerned about that. But anyway, that's about it. I think here we get it tied up, and that's about that. And then I had one more thing I wanted to show you. So here's a look at the stern, and on the left side of the screen, what you can't see is the dock. And the reason why we're not up against the dock is because the barge is much wider than the tug. And you can still see some of those clouds of sand that I've stirred up here. But I've gone all stop here, and the reason why I've gone all stop is that the pilot boat is coming to retrieve the pilot. So here he comes right now, and this is a relatively tricky maneuver for the pilot boat, and that's why I've taken the engine out of gear so that my wheel wash won't affect him. But the pilot needs to get off and go do pilot-y things, and so there he is going down there. He's going down the ladder. I'm still watching everything, and everything's fine. At this point, his job is to get us safely to the dock. My job is to get the thing to, you know, to steer it and get it onto the dock and tie it up. And so his job is concluded right now. So he's going off, and the reason why this is a difficult thing, you can see he's stepping over the push gear down there, and the pilot boat can't get alongside the tug because he'll get caught up in that push gear. And even if it didn't hurt his boat, we don't want him messing. Remember, it's about $30,000 for each one of those legs of push gear. It's very susceptible to chafe. So anyway, that was it. And great pilot. I think he's going off on his 3 weeks off, and then he has 3 weeks of standby, and then he comes and works for 3 weeks. And here's a little look at the Coast Guard base we're working at. And thank you so much for watching. And you guys take care, be safe, and as always, I'll see you on the water.